The air mattress deflated again. That's the sound that woke me up every night at 3 a.m. for 6 months straight. The slow hiss of cheap plastic giving up, my body sinking toward the cold concrete floor of my brother's garage. The space between the lawnmower and his wife's exercise bike had become my bedroom. A cardboard box served as my nightstand, holding my phone charger, a bottle of water, and the pills that kept the nightmares from the desert at bay. I pulled the thin blanket tighter around my shoulders and stared at the garage door opener's blinking red light. Outside, rain drummed against the metal roof like artillery fire. My hands started shaking, not from the cold, but from the familiar flood of memories that always came with that sound. I pressed my palms against my ears and counted backward from 10 in Arabic, a grounding technique my therapist had taught me before the VA cut my sessions short. The house beyond the garage door was warm. I could see the golden glow seeping under the crack, hear the muffled sound of late-night television drifting through the walls. My brother Marcus lived there with his wife Jennifer and their twin boys. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a finished basement with a pool table. But there was no room for his sister who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, who had pulled him out of more bar fights than she could count before she enlisted, who had sent half her combat pay home to help him. Through college, Jennifer had made it clear from day one that I was temporary. A charity case. Her exact words were, "We're doing this out of the goodness of our hearts, but don't get comfortable." The goodness of their hearts apparently included a sleeping bag on concrete, a mini fridge they'd dragged out of storage, and permission to use the guest bathroom for exactly 10 minutes each morning before the boys woke up. I wasn't supposed to be there long. The plan was simple. Crash at Marcus's place for a few weeks while I got back on my feet, find a job, get an apartment, rebuild the life that had shattered when I came home from Kandahar with invisible wounds and a medical discharge. But weeks turned into months, and every job interview ended the same way. They'd scan my resume, see the gap where deployment should have been, and suddenly remember they needed someone with more recent experience. The garage had become my entire world, 20 feet by 20 feet of space that smelled like motor oil and disappointment. I'd arranged my few belongings with military precision, fatigues hanging from a hook on the wall, boots lined up by the door, my laptop balanced on an overturned milk crate that served as my desk. It was pathetic, but it was organized pathetic. During the day, I applied for jobs from the local coffee shop, using their Wi-Fi and pretending I had somewhere else to be. I'd order 1 cup of coffee and nurse it for hours, watching other people live their lives while I filled out applications that would never get responses. The baristas started to recognize me, offering sympathetic smiles and free refills when they thought no one was looking. At night, I'd return to the garage after Marcus and Jennifer had gone to bed. I'd learned their schedule by heart. Dinner at 6, kids' bedtime at 8, Jennifer's yoga videos at 9, lights out by 10:30. The garage door would creak open just enough for me to slip inside, and I'd settle onto my deflating mattress with my laptop, working on something nobody knew about. That something was changing everything, but I couldn't tell them. Not Marcus, who rolled his eyes every time I mentioned needing privacy for phone calls. Not Jennifer, who complained about the electric bill when I asked to charge my devices. Not the twins, who had started calling me Aunt Garage, with the casual cruelty that only children possess. The business had started small, born from desperation and the skills the Army had drilled into me without me realizing it. Logistics, problem-solving, managing resources under pressure. What began as a way to make $50 here and there had evolved into something bigger. Much bigger. But I kept it quiet, working late into the night while my family slept soundly in their beds, assuming I was just another broken veteran collecting disability checks and feeling sorry for myself. They had no idea that the woman they'd relegated to sleeping next to paint cans and garden tools was building something that would change everything. No idea that my laptop sessions weren't just desperate job searching, but strategic planning that would eventually make headlines. No idea that their unwanted houseguest was quietly amassing wealth that would shock them when the truth finally came out. But that revelation was still months away. For now, I was just Sarah, the sister who couldn't get her life together, the veteran who couldn't adapt to civilian life, the burden who slept in the garage and used their Wi-Fi to apply for jobs that never called back. I was the family disappointment who ate leftover pizza for breakfast and washed her hair in the utility sink when the house was empty. The rain kept falling, and the air mattress kept deflating, and I kept working in the shadows of my brother's garage, building an empire that none of them could see coming. Because sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who end up being the most surprised when you prove them wrong. I had learned to be invisible in that garage, to move through their lives like a ghost who occasionally needed to borrow the shower. But invisibility, I was beginning to understand, could be a superpower when wielded correctly. While they saw failure, I was crafting success. While they saw burden, I was building independence. While they saw the end of my story, I was writing the beginning of theirs. The deflated mattress hit the concrete with a soft thud, and I repositioned myself on the floor, pulling my laptop closer. The screen's blue glow illuminated my face in the darkness as I continued working on the project that would eventually put my name in newspapers across the country. The project that would transform me from the sister who slept in the garage to the woman who would choose whether or not to let them back into her life. But first, I had to survive another night on the cold floor, another morning of pretending. I belonged nowhere. Another day of building something extraordinary in the shadows while they lived their ordinary lives just 20 feet away. I wasn't always the family disappointment sleeping in a garage. There was a time when Marcus looked up to me, when Jennifer actually smiled when I walked into a room, when I was Sarah Martinez, the golden child who had it all figured out. Growing up in Riverside, California, I was the responsible one. Marcus was 3 years younger, all charm and mischief, the kind of kid who could talk his way out of trouble with a crooked grin and a promise to do better next time. Our parents worked double shifts at the hospital, Mom as a surgical nurse, Dad as a maintenance supervisor, leaving me to pick up the pieces when Marcus inevitably found himself in over his head. I was 15 when I first had to bail him out of a situation that could have ruined his life. He'd been caught shoplifting with a group of older kids from school, trying to impress them with his fearlessness. The store manager was ready to press charges until I showed up, still in my McDonald's uniform from my after-school job, and talked him down. I used my savings to pay for the stolen items and promised to bring Marcus back to apologize properly. That became the pattern. Marcus would mess up, and I would fix it. He'd fail a class, and I'd spend nights tutoring him. He'd get suspended for fighting, and I'd negotiate with the principal for reduced punishment. He'd wreck Dad's car, and I'd work extra shifts to help pay for repairs. Our parents were grateful but exhausted, always saying things like, "Thank God for Sarah," and "What would we do without you?" I thrived on being needed, on being the one who could handle anything. My grades were perfect, not because learning came easily, but because I studied harder than anyone else. I was class president, captain of the debate team, and worked 20 hours a week at McDonald's to save money for college. My guidance counselor called me college material and helped me apply for scholarships that would cover my entire education. The plan was UCLA for political science, then law school. I was going to be the first Martinez to graduate college, the one who would lift our family into the middle class permanently. Marcus would follow my example, get his act together, and maybe we'd even practice law together someday. That was the dream I carried through high school, the vision that kept me working when I was tired, studying when I wanted to sleep. Then September 11th happened during my senior year. I was in AP Government when the principal's voice crackled over the intercom, asking all teachers to turn on their televisions. We watched the towers fall in stunned silence, and something inside me shifted permanently. The college plans felt suddenly frivolous. The debate team competition seemed meaningless. While my classmates worried about prom themes and graduation parties, I was researching military service requirements. I didn't tell anyone immediately. For weeks, I carried around Army recruitment brochures hidden in my backpack, reading them, during lunch break and between classes. The more I learned, the more sense it made. The military would pay for college through the GI Bill. I could serve my country, get training, see the world, and still come back to pursue my dreams. It felt like the responsible choice, the mature choice. My parents were devastated when I finally told them. Mom cried for 3 days straight. Dad barely spoke to me for a week. Marcus was the worst. He accused me of abandoning him, of breaking my promise to help him through his senior year. He was struggling with math and had been counting on me to tutor him through calculus. Without my help, he might not graduate on time. But I was 18 and determined. The Army recruiter painted pictures of technical training, leadership opportunities, and the chance to make a real difference in the world. I signed my contract 2 weeks before graduation, choosing military police as my specialty because it seemed like good preparation for law enforcement or legal work later. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I loved it. For the first time in my life, everyone started at zero. My background didn't matter. My family's expectations didn't matter. Only my willingness to push through when things got difficult. I graduated in the top 10% of my class and felt invincible. My first duty station was Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I threw myself into military life with the same intensity I'd brought to everything else. I earned my expert marksmanship badge, completed additional training in criminal investigations, and was promoted to specialist ahead of schedule. My commanding officers praised my attention to detail and ability to handle complex situations under pressure. Back home, things were different. Marcus had barely graduated high school and was working at a tire shop, living with our parents and showing no interest in college. During my phone calls home, Mom would complain about his late nights and irresponsible behavior. Dad worried about him falling in with the wrong crowd. They expected me to talk sense into him during my rare leave. Visits to be the big sister who could fix everything like I always had. But I was changing. Military life was reshaping me into someone harder, more independent, less willing to clean up other people's mistakes. When Marcus asked me to co-sign a loan for a motorcycle during one of my visits, I said no. When he got arrested for underage drinking and called me instead of our parents, I told him to handle it himself. I was done being his safety net. The family dynamic shifted accordingly. Our parents started treating Marcus like the child who needed protection, and me like the outsider who had chosen duty over family. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Care packages stopped arriving. When I was deployed to Iraq in 2004, they sent letters but seemed unsure what to say to someone whose life was so foreign to theirs. Iraq changed everything. The woman who had joined the army to serve her country and pay for college became someone else entirely. The responsible big sister who fixed everyone's problems learned what it meant to make life and death decisions daily. The girl who had never been further from home than San Diego found herself navigating roadside bombs and insurgent attacks in a desert half a world away. I extended my deployment twice, partly because the job wasn't finished, partly because I wasn't sure what waited for me back home. By the time I finally returned to civilian life, I'd served 3 tours in 2 different countries. I'd earned commendations for bravery, been promoted to sergeant, and saved enough money to last for months without working. But I'd also developed anxiety that made sleeping difficult, hypervigilance that made crowded places unbearable, and a 1,000-yard stare that made family gatherings awkward. The girl who had left for the army with dreams of law school and middle-class success came home with invisible wounds and no clear path forward. That's when I called Marcus about crashing on his couch for a few weeks, just until I figured things out. The first sign should have been the way Jennifer looked at me when Marcus opened the front door. Not surprised, I'd called ahead, but annoyed, like I was a package that had arrived at an inconvenient time. She stood behind him in the hallway, arms crossed, wearing yoga pants and a tank top that probably cost more than my entire duffel bag of belongings. "Sarah's going to stay with us for a little while," Marcus announced, as if we hadn't already discussed this over the phone. "Just until she gets back on her feet." Jennifer's smile was thin and cold. Of course. Family helps family. But her eyes said something different entirely. They said, "How long is a little while?" They said, "I didn't sign up for this." They said, "You better not get comfortable." The guest room lasted exactly 3 days. On day 4, Jennifer informed me that her mother was coming to visit for an indefinite period and would need the space. "You understand," she said, not asking, but telling. "Family comes first." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was family too, apparently just not the right kind. Marcus suggested the living room couch, but Jennifer shut that down immediately. "The boys come downstairs early for cartoons," she explained. "It wouldn't be appropriate." So the garage it was, with an air mattress Jennifer found in the basement and a space heater that worked sporadically. "It's just temporary," Marcus assured me as he helped me set up my makeshift bedroom between his workout equipment and storage boxes. Jennifer's still adjusting to having someone else in the house. But I could see in his eyes that he'd already chosen sides, and it wasn't mine. The rule started immediately. I could shower once per day, but only after 10 p.m. when the boys were asleep, and I had exactly 10 minutes before Jennifer needed the bathroom for her skincare routine. I could use the kitchen, but only to store food in the small section of the refrigerator they designated as mine. 1 shelf, half the vegetable drawer. Cooking was allowed only when the family wasn't eating, which meant strange hours and cold meals more often than not. The laundry room was off limits entirely. "Our washer is expensive," Jennifer explained. "It's calibrated for specific detergents." "I could use the laundromat in town," she suggested helpfully, as if I should be grateful for the recommendation. Parking was another issue. My beat-up Honda Civic couldn't go in their driveway because it might leak oil on the pristine concrete. Street parking only, and I had to move it every few days to avoid the city's parking restrictions. Jennifer mentioned this with fake concern. "We wouldn't want you getting tickets. That would be expensive." The Wi-Fi password was changed weekly, and somehow I was always the last to know the new one. "Oh, did we forget to tell you?" became Jennifer's favorite phrase. I'd find myself sitting in coffee shops or the public library, trying to do basic things like check email or apply for jobs, while their household continued functioning seamlessly without me. Meals were the worst part. The first week, Jennifer had invited me to join them for dinner, but the invitation came with so many conditions it felt more like punishment than hospitality. I had to contribute groceries but couldn't influence the menu. I had to help cook, but couldn't suggest changes to recipes. I had to clean up afterward, but couldn't reorganize anything in the kitchen to make the process more efficient. By the second week, the dinner invitations stopped altogether. "We eat so early because of the boys' schedule," Jennifer explained. "You probably wouldn't like our kid-friendly meals anyway." So I ate alone in the garage, microwaving frozen dinners or making sandwiches from the limited supplies I could afford, and store in my designated refrigerator space. The boys, Marcus Jr. and David, were 8 years old and had clearly absorbed their mother's attitude toward me. They called me Aunt Garage within my earshot, giggling like it was the cleverest joke in the world. When I tried to connect with them, offering to help with homework or play video games, Jennifer would intervene with sudden activities they needed to do instead. "Boys, time for piano practice," she'd announce the moment I sat down with them. Or, "Don't you have that project due tomorrow?" Anything to create distance between me and the children I'd sent birthday presents to from 3 different countries. Marcus was the most disappointing part of all this. The brother I'd bailed out, of jail, tutored through high school and supported through every crisis, had somehow convinced himself that this treatment was reasonable. When I tried to talk to him about Jennifer's hostility, he'd sigh and say things like, "She's just protective of our space," or, "You have to understand, this is hard on her too." "Hard on her?" I asked one evening when we were both in the garage. Him looking for golf clubs, me trying to have a private conversation. "Marcus, I'm sleeping on the floor." "It's temporary," he repeated, the same phrase he'd been using for months. "Once you find a job, get your own place, things will go back to normal." But it wasn't just about living arrangements. It was about respect, acknowledgement, basic human dignity. Jennifer had turned my temporary housing situation into a masterclass in making someone feel unwelcome in their own family. Every interaction was designed to remind me that I was a burden, an inconvenience, a charity case who should be grateful for whatever scraps of hospitality they threw my way. The job search became their favorite topic of conversation. Not supportive inquiries about how it was going, but pointed questions about why it was taking so long, subtle implications that I wasn't trying hard enough. "Sarah's been looking for work for months now," Jennifer would tell visitors, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It's so hard for veterans to adjust." She'd say this while I was sitting right there, as if I were a problem to be discussed rather than a person to be addressed. The visitors would nod sympathetically and offer generic advice about networking and persistence, completely missing the undertone of judgment in Jennifer's words. Marcus would chime in with his own version of concern. "Maybe you're being too picky about jobs. Sometimes you have to start at the bottom." This from a man who had fallen into his current position through a college friend's father, who had never filled out a job application in his life, who had no concept of what it meant to explain deployment, gaps to suspicious hiring managers. The garage became more than just my bedroom. It became my entire world. I spent 18 hours a day in that space, leaving only for job interviews, grocery shopping, and the occasional coffee shop session to use better Wi-Fi. I learned to recognize every sound the house made, every pattern of movement from the family I was supposedly part of, but clearly didn't belong to. The isolation was methodical and complete. They'd somehow managed to make me feel like an outsider in my own brother's home while maintaining the fiction that they were doing me a tremendous favor. It was psychological warfare disguised as family support, and I was losing ground every day. What they didn't realize was that their treatment was teaching me something valuable about resilience, about self-reliance, about what happens when you strip away everything external and have to build from nothing. They thought they were breaking me down, showing me my place in their carefully ordered world. Instead, they were forging me into something harder, more determined, more willing to take risks, because I had nothing left to lose. The woman they were systematically humiliating in their garage was quietly becoming someone they would never see coming. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October, 6 months after I'd moved into the garage. I woke up to the sound of voices in the driveway, familiar voices that made my blood run cold. My parents had driven down from Riverside unannounced, their old Buick parked behind Marcus's SUV. I could hear them through the thin garage walls, talking to Marcus and Jennifer on the front porch. Mom's voice carried that particular tone she used when she was trying to sound reasonable while delivering bad news. "We're worried about Sarah," she was saying. "It's been 6 months, and she doesn't seem to be making any progress. Maybe she needs professional help." "She's trying," Marcus replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "The job market is tough right now." Jennifer's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Marcus, she sleeps until noon and spends all day on that computer. When was the last time she actually went to a job interview?" I pressed my ear against the wall, my hands shaking with rage. I'd been to 14 interviews in the past month alone. I'd been turned down for positions at Target, rejected by call centers, deemed overqualified for entry-level work, and underqualified for anything that matched my military experience. Dad's voice cut through the morning air like a knife. maybe. The military thing was a mistake. Some people just aren't cut out for civilian life. The words hit me like a physical blow. This was the same man who had cried with pride when I graduated basic training, who had bragged to his coworkers about his daughter serving overseas. Now I was a mistake. A failed experiment in patriotism that had backfired spectacularly. She needs structure, Mom continued. Rules. Maybe she should look into one of those programs for veterans who can't adjust. Jennifer seized the opportunity. Actually, we've been talking about that. This situation isn't sustainable anymore. We have the boys to think about, and having someone so unstable around them isn't healthy. Unstable. The word echoed in my head like a gunshot. I was unstable because I had nightmares. Unstable because crowded places made me anxious. Unstable because I'd served my country and came back different than when I left. We love Sarah, Marcus said, and I could hear the rehearsed quality in his voice. But we think she'd be better off in a more therapeutic environment. They were planning an intervention, not the kind where family members express love and concern, but the kind where they'd already decided I was the problem, and their solution was to ship me off somewhere else. Somewhere that wasn't their problem anymore. I heard footsteps approaching, the garage door, and I quickly lay back down on my air mattress, closing my eyes and pretending to sleep. The door creaked open, and I felt them standing there. 4 people who were supposed to love me, looking down at me like I was a zoo animal that had stopped performing tricks. See? Jennifer whispered. It's almost noon, and she's still asleep. What they couldn't see was the laptop hidden under my blanket, still warm from the all-night work session I'd just finished. They couldn't see the spreadsheets full of numbers. That would have shocked them. The business plans that were already generating income. The foundation I was building while they slept in their comfortable beds. Sarah? Mom's voice was artificially gentle, the tone you'd use with a mental patient. Honey, we need to talk. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking as if I was just waking up. Mom? Dad? What are you doing here? They exchanged glances, and I could see the family conference they'd already held, the decisions they'd made about my life without including me in the conversation. We're concerned about you, Dad said, crouching down beside my mattress like he was approaching a wounded animal. This isn't working out, and we think it's time to consider other options. Other options. Code for, we've found a place to dump you where you won't be our responsibility anymore. Jennifer stepped forward, her voice dripping with false compassion. There's a wonderful facility in San Diego that specializes in veteran transition issues. They have programs for people who are struggling to adapt. I'm not struggling, I said, sitting up straighter. I'm rebuilding. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sarah, you've been rebuilding for 6 months, living in our garage, using our electricity, our internet, our food. At some point, you have to face reality. Reality. Their reality was that I was a burden, a failure, a woman who couldn't handle civilian life and needed to be institutionalized for everyone's peace of mind. My reality was that I was 3 weeks away from a breakthrough that would change everything, but I couldn't tell them that without revealing the work I'd been doing in secret. The facility has excellent reviews, Mom added, pulling a brochure from her purse. It's like a retreat where you can get the help you need. I took the brochure and stared at the glossy photos of veterans doing arts and crafts, sitting in therapy circles, learning to reintegrate into society. The tagline read, Healing Heroes One Day at a Time. This is your solution? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lock me away because I'm inconvenient? It's not locking you away, Jennifer protested. It's giving you the tools you need to succeed. And if I refuse? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. Sarah, you can't stay here indefinitely. We've been patient, but we have our own family to think about. There it was. the ultimatum dressed up as concern, the eviction notice wrapped in therapeutic language. Go to the facility or find yourself on the street with nowhere to go. I looked at the four faces staring down at me, my parents, my brother, his wife, and realized that this was my moment of complete abandonment. Not just physical abandonment, like being forced to sleep in a garage, but emotional and psychological abandonment. They had decided I was broken beyond their ability to help, and their solution was to make me someone else's problem. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course, Mom replied, but her tone suggested that thinking was just a formality. The decision had already been made. They filed out of the garage, leaving me alone with the brochure and the crushing weight of their expectations. As their voices faded back toward the house, I pulled my laptop out from under the blanket and stared at the screen that showed numbers they couldn't imagine. In 3 weeks, everything would change. But first, I had to survive the next 3 weeks without letting them ship me off to a facility for broken veterans. First, I had to find the strength to keep building in secret while they planned my disposal. The breaking point had arrived, but not in the way they expected. This wasn't my breakdown, it was my breakthrough. And they were about to learn the difference. That night, after my family had driven back to Riverside with promises to check in soon about my decision, I sat on my deflated air mattress and made a choice that would change everything. I wasn't going to any facility. I wasn't going to be managed, medicated, or made into someone else's success story. I was going to disappear into my work completely. The next morning, I told Marcus and Jennifer I needed a few days to consider their suggestion about the veteran program. Jennifer's relief was visible. She probably thought I was finally accepting defeat. Marcus seemed genuinely hopeful that I was getting help, as if the problem had been my refusal to admit I was broken. What they didn't know was that I'd already been getting help, just not the kind they imagined. For months, I'd been participating in online forums for veteran entrepreneurs, connecting with other former service members who were building businesses. From nothing. These weren't therapy sessions, they were strategy meetings. We shared resources, discussed market opportunities, and supported each other through the unique challenges of translating military skills into civilian success. The business I'd been developing in secret wasn't some small craft project or consulting gig. I'd identified a massive gap in the logistics software market, specifically for small to medium-sized businesses that couldn't afford enterprise-level solutions but needed more than basic shipping calculators. My military experience in supply chain management, combined with the coding skills I'd taught myself during deployment downtime, had led me to create something that could revolutionize inventory management for thousands of companies. I'd started by reaching out to former military contacts who were now working in logistics and supply chain roles. They became my first beta testers, providing feedback on the software's functionality and helping me refine the algorithms. Word spread through veteran networks, and soon I had requests for demos from companies I'd never directly contacted. The garage became my headquarters in a way that Marcus and Jennifer could never have imagined. While they thought I was wallowing in depression, I was conducting video conferences with potential clients at 2 a.m. to accommodate their schedules. While they assumed I was avoiding responsibility, I was managing a beta program with 47 companies across 12 states. My daily routine became a masterpiece of deception. I'd emerge from the garage each morning looking defeated, shuffle to the kitchen for coffee, and make casual comments about job applications and interview rejections. Jennifer would nod sympathetically and make suggestions about lowering my expectations. Marcus would offer generic encouragement about persistence paying off. Then I'd disappear back into the garage, supposedly to sulk and avoid reality. Instead, I'd spend 14 hours a day coding improvements, analyzing user data, and building relationships with decision-makers at companies that needed my solution. I learned to recognize the sound patterns of the household: when Jennifer was doing yoga, when the boys were at school, when Marcus was traveling for work, and scheduled my most important calls during those windows. The breakthrough came when a mid-sized distribution company in Phoenix agreed to a 6-month pilot program. They'd been struggling with inventory discrepancies and shipping delays, losing money on mismanaged logistics. My software solved their problems within the first month of implementation. Their efficiency improved by 38%, and their shipping errors dropped to nearly zero. Word of mouth in the logistics industry moves fast. Within weeks, I had inquiries from companies in Nevada, Texas, and Colorado. Each success story led to 3 more potential clients. The software that I'd built on a laptop balanced on a milk crate in my brother's garage was generating more interest than I could handle alone. I opened a business bank account using a P.O. box address, not wanting to complicate things by having business mail delivered to Marcus's house. Jennifer would have had questions about packages and correspondence that I wasn't ready to answer. The first deposit was for $12,000, more money than I'd seen in one place since my final military paycheck. But success brought new challenges. Client calls couldn't always be scheduled around the family's routine. I started taking important meetings from my car, parked in various locations around the city. The McDonald's parking lot where I'd worked in high school became a frequent office space, providing reliable Wi-Fi and enough privacy for confidential conversations about pricing and implementation timelines. I also had to upgrade my equipment, without raising suspicion. The ancient laptop I'd been using was no longer adequate for the complex demands of managing multiple client implementations simultaneously. I needed professional-grade hardware, backup systems, and security software that could protect my clients' proprietary data. The solution came in the form of a carefully orchestrated deception. I told Marcus and Jennifer that I'd been accepted into a vocational rehabilitation program through the VA that provided job training equipment. It wasn't entirely a lie. Such programs did exist, and I had applied for several. But the expensive laptop and professional software I brought home came from my business profits, not taxpayer funding. Jennifer was actually pleased by this development. Finally, she told Marcus within my earshot, she's getting the help she needs. She saw my new equipment as evidence that I was receiving professional intervention, not realizing she was looking at the tools of an increasingly successful business owner. The isolation that had once felt like punishment began to feel like protection. The garage provided the privacy I needed to build something extraordinary without interference or unwanted advice. Every slight, every dismissive comment, every reminder that I was a burden became fuel for the fire I was building in secret. Started working 18-hour days, surviving on energy drinks and determination. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Not because I was struggling, but because I was succeeding faster than I'd ever imagined possible. The woman they thought was failing was actually outpacing every goal she'd set for herself. By December, I had 17 active clients across 9 states, with 3 more contracts pending final approval. The software was generating revenue that exceeded my military salary by a significant margin. But more importantly, I was building something that had value beyond money. A business that solved real problems for real people, that justified every sacrifice I'd made to get to this point. The girl who had enlisted to serve her country had become a woman who was serving the business community in ways she'd never anticipated. And the family who thought they were watching her fail was about to discover what she'd been building while they weren't paying attention. The real education began at 3 a.m. in January, 3 months after the intervention attempt. While my family slept soundly in their heated bedrooms, I was hunched over my laptop in the freezing garage, teaching myself advanced database architecture through YouTube videos and online courses. The space heater had finally died completely, and I'd been too proud to ask Marcus to replace it. Instead, I worked wrapped in a sleeping bag, my breath visible in the cold air, fingers stiff on the keyboard. The software that had started as a simple inventory tracking system was evolving into something far more sophisticated. My clients weren't just asking for basic functionality anymore. They wanted predictive analytics, automated reordering systems, and integration with their existing accounting software. Each new request forced me to learn skills I'd never needed in the military, to push beyond what I thought was possible with my limited technical background. I enrolled in online courses from MIT and Stanford, using financial aid I qualified for as a veteran. Jennifer noticed the textbooks arriving and assumed they were part of my vocational rehabilitation program. She'd flip through them when I wasn't around, shaking her head at titles like Advanced Algorithm Design and Database Systems, the complete book. "She's really trying," I heard her tell Marcus one evening. "Though I'm not sure how practical computer classes are for someone in her situation." Her situation, as if my circumstances were a medical condition rather than a temporary living arrangement. But her dismissive attitude worked in my favor. She never asked detailed questions about what I was studying or why I needed such advanced materials. The garage became a laboratory where I experimented with code that would make or break client relationships. I set up a testing environment on an old desktop computer I'd bought used, running simulations of inventory scenarios that could crash a small business if handled incorrectly. The margin for error was non-existent. These companies were trusting their entire supply chain operation to software I'd written in a space that smelled like motor oil and disappointment. My first major technical breakthrough came while debugging a complex algorithm at 4 a.m. I'd been struggling for weeks with a data synchronization problem that was causing inventory discrepancies for a client in Denver. The solution required implementing a custom conflict resolution protocol that could handle simultaneous updates from multiple users without corrupting the database. The moment the code finally worked, when I ran the test and saw perfect synchronization across all data points, I wanted to wake up the house and celebrate. Instead, I sat alone in the dark garage, tears streaming down my face, knowing I'd just solved a problem that had stumped programmers at companies with million-dollar budgets. But technical skills were only half the battle. I had to learn business operations from scratch: accounting, contract negotiation, project management, customer service. The Army had taught me logistics and leadership, but nobody had prepared me for explaining software licensing terms to confused clients or managing cash flow when payment terms varied from 30 to 90 days. I bought business books with my first profits and read them cover to cover, making notes in the margins and creating my own reference guides. The lean startup taught me about iterative development and customer feedback loops. Getting to yes helped me navigate difficult negotiations with procurement departments. The personal MBA filled gaps in my understanding of business fundamentals that most entrepreneurs learned in college. The learning curve was brutal. I made mistakes that cost money and credibility. I underpriced my services initially, not understanding the true value of what I was providing. I accepted contract terms that favored clients heavily because I was afraid of losing deals. I spent months building features that customers requested but never actually used, learning the hard way that what people say they want and what they actually need are often different things. One particularly expensive lesson came when a client in Oregon requested a complete customization of the reporting system. I spent 6 weeks building exactly what they specified, working nights and weekends to meet their deadline. When I delivered the finished product, they used it once and then requested a completely different approach. I'd wasted nearly 2 months of development time because I hadn't asked the right questions up front. But each failure taught me something valuable. I developed better discovery processes for understanding client needs. I learned to ask probing questions about workflow and priorities before writing a single line of code. I started requiring detailed specifications and sign-offs before beginning any custom development work. The business relationships I was building became more complex as my reputation grew. Clients started referring me to their partners and suppliers, creating a network effect that brought in opportunities I never could have generated through cold outreach. A successful implementation at a furniture distributor in Nevada led to contracts with 3 of their largest suppliers. A textile company in North Carolina introduced me to their entire trade association. Each new client brought unique challenges that forced me to expand my skill set. A medical supply company needed HIPAA-compliant data handling. A food distributor required integration with FDA tracking systems. An automotive parts supplier wanted real-time synchronization with their manufacturing. Partner systems. Every project pushed me to learn new technologies, new regulations, new industry-specific requirements. I started specializing in what became known as impossible integrations, connecting systems that weren't designed to work together, making legacy software communicate with modern platforms, creating bridges between incompatible databases. Other developers would quote these projects as 6-month, six-figure undertakings. I was delivering them in weeks for a fraction of the cost, because I was working alone with minimal overhead and unlimited motivation. The technical reputation I was building caught the attention of larger companies who needed complex problems, solved quickly and quietly. A Fortune 500 retailer hired me to fix a supply chain crisis that was costing them millions in missed deliveries. They couldn't wait for their IT department to go through normal procurement processes, so they brought me in as an emergency consultant through a third-party vendor. Working with enterprise-level clients taught me about scalability challenges I'd never encountered with smaller businesses. Systems that worked perfectly for companies with thousands of SKUs would crash when processing millions of data points. I had to rewrite core algorithms to handle industrial-scale operations, learning about distributed computing and load balancing on the fly. The garage workspace became increasingly inadequate as my client base grew. I needed multiple monitors to manage complex debugging sessions. I required backup internet connections for critical client calls. I invested in a portable server rack that I disguised as storage shelving, hoping Jennifer wouldn't notice the humming equipment hidden behind Christmas decorations and old camping gear. My daily schedule became a carefully orchestrated performance. Morning coffee with Marcus and Jennifer, casual conversation about my job search, complaints about the difficulty of veteran employment. Then 8 to 10 hours of focused development work, punctuated by client calls conducted from my car or local coffee shops. Evenings were spent on administrative tasks, invoicing, contract reviews, planning next day priorities. The disconnect between my public persona and private reality was becoming harder to maintain. Clients were sending payments that exceeded what most people earned in months. I was solving problems for companies with hundreds of employees while my own family assumed I couldn't handle a basic retail job. The woman they saw as unemployable was becoming indispensable to businesses across multiple industries. But I wasn't ready to reveal the truth yet. The foundation I was building required more time to solidify. I needed larger contracts, more diverse revenue streams, undeniable proof of success before I could afford to burn bridges with the family that had reluctantly housed me. The garage had become my crucible, and I wasn't finished forging myself into someone they could never dismiss again. The persistence phase began in earnest that spring, when the reality of building a business alone hit me like a freight train. Success wasn't just about writing good code or solving complex problems. It was about showing up every single day, even when everything felt impossible, even when the garage walls seemed to close in around me, even when my family's dismissive comments cut deeper than usual. March brought my first major crisis. 3 clients simultaneously requested urgent updates to their systems due to new industry regulations. A pharmaceutical distributor needed data compliance modifications within 2 weeks. A food service company required updated allergen tracking by month's end. An automotive parts supplier was facing an audit that demanded enhanced traceability features immediately. Each project required full-time attention, but I was one person working from a space barely large enough for a car. I stopped sleeping entirely for 11 days straight, surviving on protein bars and energy drinks, working in 18-hour cycles with 2-hour power naps on the garage floor. My hands developed a permanent tremor from caffeine overload, and my eyes burned constantly from staring at screens in dim lighting. Jennifer noticed my deteriorating appearance and made concerned comments to Marcus about my mental state. Never realizing she was witnessing the physical toll of extreme professional dedication. The pharmaceutical project alone required learning an entirely new regulatory framework, understanding drug serialization requirements, and implementing tamper-evident tracking systems that couldn't fail under any circumstances. A single coding error could result in supply chain disruptions affecting patient safety. The pressure was unlike anything I'd experienced, even in combat zones where mistakes meant immediate consequences. I worked through the complexity methodically, breaking each requirement into manageable components, testing obsessively, documenting every decision for future audits. The garage became a war room filled with printed regulations, flowcharts taped to walls, and whiteboards covered in technical specifications. When Marcus came looking for golf clubs one afternoon, he stared at the organized chaos surrounding my workspace. "What is all this?" he asked, genuinely puzzled by the professional setup I'd created. "Study materials for my vocational program," I replied without looking up from my code. "They're really thorough about documentation requirements." He nodded approvingly. "Good to see you taking it seriously." If only he knew how seriously. The vocational program was generating more revenue than his corporate middle management position, but I maintained the fiction because I wasn't ready for questions I couldn't answer without revealing everything. The food service project required different expertise entirely. Allergen tracking involved understanding complex supply chain relationships, cross-contamination prevention protocols, and liability issues that could shut down restaurant operations. I spent nights reading FDA guidelines and HACCP procedures, teaching myself food safety regulations that had nothing to do with software development, but everything to do with serving my client effectively. The automotive audit demanded real-time integration with manufacturing execution systems, automated compliance reporting, and detailed traceability records stretching back 5 years. I had to reverse engineer poorly documented legacy systems, creating interfaces that could extract historical data without disrupting ongoing operations. Working on 3 critical projects simultaneously taught me about resource management in ways no business school could have prepared me for. I developed time-blocking strategies that maximized productive hours, created backup plans for every potential failure point, and learned to communicate progress to anxious clients without revealing how close to breaking I was. The breakthrough came at 3:47 a.m. on a Thursday, when the final piece of code for the pharmaceutical project compiled successfully and passed all validation tests. The system that had consumed 2 weeks of my life was working perfectly, ready for deployment to production servers that would handle millions of dollars in drug distribution. I sat in the dark garage, exhausted but exhilarated, knowing I'd just delivered something that would make a real difference in healthcare supply chains. All 3 projects were completed on time and exceeded client expectations. The pharmaceutical company's compliance audit passed without issues. The food service company avoided potential regulatory violations that could have cost millions in fines. The automotive supplier's traceability systems impressed auditors so thoroughly that they requested documentation to share as a best practice example with other companies. But success brought new challenges I hadn't anticipated. Word spread through industry networks about the mysterious developer who could handle impossible deadlines and complex regulatory requirements. My email inbox filled with project requests that would have required a team of developers to complete properly. I was being offered contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that I couldn't accept without expanding operations beyond what a single person could manage. The temptation to reveal my success and recruit help was overwhelming, but I wasn't ready to expose the business to scrutiny from family members who still saw me as unemployable. Instead, I developed strategies for scaling my impact without scaling my workforce. I created modular code libraries that could be quickly customized for different clients. I automated testing procedures that had previously required manual verification. I built deployment tools that reduced implementation time from weeks to days. The grinding persistence required to maintain this pace while living in a garage was unlike anything I'd experienced in military service. Combat deployments had clear timeframes and defined objectives. This was an endurance test with no predetermined endpoint, where every day brought new challenges that required immediate solutions. My physical workspace evolved to support the increasing demands. I installed better lighting to reduce eye strain during long coding sessions. I bought an ergonomic chair that could be folded and hidden when family members entered the garage. I set up multiple backup power systems to protect against outages that could corrupt hours of work. The space that had once been my prison became a carefully optimized command center. The isolation that had initially felt punitive became advantageous for maintaining focus on complex problems. While other developers dealt with office distractions and meeting schedules, I could work uninterrupted for hours, diving deep into technical challenges that required sustained concentration. The garage's separation from household activity created a boundary between my personal struggles and professional achievements. Client relationships deepened as my track record grew. Companies that had initially hired me for specific projects began requesting ongoing support and strategic consultation. I wasn't just fixing problems anymore. I was helping businesses optimize their entire logistics operations, identifying inefficiencies they hadn't recognized, suggesting improvements that could save significant money over time. A textile manufacturer in South Carolina asked me to analyze their entire supply chain after I'd solved a localized inventory problem. My recommendations for restructuring their distribution network resulted in a 23% reduction in shipping costs and a 37% improvement in delivery times. They offered me a full-time executive position that I politely declined, preferring to maintain the independence that allowed me to serve multiple industries simultaneously. The grinding phase was teaching me lessons about resilience that went far beyond technical skills. Every day I chose to continue working despite my family's indifference was a declaration of self-worth. Every problem I solved despite inadequate workspace was proof that circumstances don't determine outcomes. Every success I achieved while living in a garage demonstrated that recognition isn't required for accomplishment. By late spring, I was managing steady relationships with 37 clients across 14 states, with a waiting list of projects extending into the following year. The business that had started as survival strategy was becoming something much larger, an enterprise that could change not just my circumstances, but my entire future. But I still had to wake up every morning on an air mattress, pretend to search for jobs I didn't need, and accept my family's pity for struggles they couldn't see I'd already overcome. The recognition came from the most unexpected source. I was debugging a supply chain integration for an aerospace parts manufacturer in Seattle, when my phone buzzed with a Google alert I'd set up months earlier. My company name, Martinez Logistics Solutions, had been mentioned in a trade publication article about innovative small businesses transforming the industry. The article was titled, "Hidden Gems: 5 Software Companies Revolutionizing Supply Chain Management." There, in the third paragraph, was a detailed description of my work with 3 different clients, praising the innovative approach to legacy system integration and remarkable cost-effectiveness compared to enterprise solutions. The journalist had interviewed my clients without my knowledge, and their testimonials read like something from a marketing brochure I could never have written myself. Martinez Logistics Solutions has saved us over $400,000 in the past year alone, said the CEO of the Oregon furniture distributor. Their software eliminated inventory discrepancies that were costing us thousands monthly, and their response time for issues is unlike anything we've experienced with larger vendors. I stared at my laptop screen in the dim garage, reading the words 3 times before they sank in. Someone had noticed. Not my family, not the people who saw me every day, but industry professionals who understood the value of what I was building. For the first time in months, I felt something other than grim determination. I felt pride. The article's publication triggered an avalanche of new inquiries. Within 48 hours, my business email received 63 requests for consultations, product demonstrations, and partnership discussions. Companies from industries I'd never considered were asking about adapting my solutions for their specific needs. A pharmaceutical distributor in Florida wanted to discuss enterprise-level implementation. A defense contractor in Virginia needed help with secured supply chain tracking. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. TechCrunch had picked up the trade publication story and was requesting an interview for a feature about veteran entrepreneurs who were quietly building the next generation of logistics technology. They wanted to profile my company as part of a larger story about military personnel transitioning into successful civilian businesses. The irony was staggering. My family thought I was an unemployable burden who needed professional help adjusting to civilian life. Meanwhile, a national technology publication wanted to feature my business as an example of successful veteran entrepreneurship. The disconnect between these two realities was so absurd, it made me laugh out loud in the garage. At 2 a.m., I scheduled the TechCrunch interview for the following week, planning to conduct it from my car in a parking lot across town. I couldn't risk having journalists call the house or, worse, show up at Marcus's address looking for me. The story I'd crafted about working from a home office would crumble instantly if they saw my actual workspace. The interview went better than I'd hoped. The journalist was impressed by my technical knowledge and business growth, asking detailed questions about my development process and client acquisition strategies. We discussed the challenges of competing against larger software companies and the advantages of specialized expertise in niche markets. "What's next for Martinez Logistics Solutions?" she asked near the end of our conversation. I paused, considering how to answer. The truth was that I was approaching the limits of what one person could accomplish alone. I needed to hire developers, establish a proper office, and invest in infrastructure that could support the growing client base. But all of that required revealing my success to people who still saw me as a failure. "We're exploring expansion opportunities," I said carefully. "The demand has exceeded our current capacity, so we're looking at strategic growth options." The article was scheduled for publication in 3 weeks. 3 weeks before my secret would become public knowledge, before my family would learn that the woman sleeping in their garage had built something worth writing about. I had 21 days to prepare for conversations I'd been avoiding for almost a year. Meanwhile, the business momentum was accelerating beyond my ability to manage it discreetly. A Fortune 500 retailer had reached out directly after reading the trade publication article, wanting to discuss a pilot program that could lead to a 7-figure contract. The project would require implementing my software across their entire distribution network, affecting hundreds of locations and thousands of employees. The logistics alone were overwhelming. I'd need to hire a development team, establish project management processes, and create support systems capable of handling enterprise-level implementation. The garage workspace that had served me well for individual client projects was completely inadequate for this scale of operation. I started researching commercial office space in the city, browsing listings for small business parks and shared workspace facilities. The monthly rent for even a modest office exceeded what I'd been contributing to Marcus and Jennifer's household expenses, which made me realize how much I'd been undervaluing my presence in their home. I wasn't a burden. I was subsidizing their mortgage while building a business worth more than their house. The recognition was also attracting attention from competitors who hadn't noticed my work before. Larger software companies were requesting meetings, ostensibly to discuss partnerships, but actually to understand how I was undercutting their pricing while delivering superior results. Some offered to acquire my business outright, presenting valuations that shocked me with their size. An enterprise software company in Austin flew a team to California specifically to meet with me. I told them I was based in the San Diego area and arranged to meet at a hotel conference room. maintaining the fiction that I operated from professional offices rather than residential garage space. The meeting felt surreal. Executives in expensive suits treating me as an equal, discussing acquisition terms that included stock options and retention bonuses worth more than I'd expected to earn in a lifetime. But I wasn't ready to sell. The business was just beginning to reach its potential, and I had ideas for expansion that could multiply its value several times over. More importantly, I wanted my family to see what I'd built before I cashed out and moved on. They needed to understand that their charity case had become something they never anticipated. The pressure of maintaining my double life was becoming unsustainable. Clients were expecting faster response times and more professional service standards. I couldn't continue conducting important business calls from parking lots or developing critical software on equipment hidden in a garage. The success I'd worked so hard to achieve was creating demands that exceeded my current circumstances. I made a decision that would change everything. I would use the TechCrunch article as my announcement to the family, letting them discover my success the same way the rest of the world had, by reading about it online. But first, I had one more project to complete, one final demonstration of what I could accomplish from the space they'd reluctantly provided. The Fortune 500 retailer had agreed to a pilot program worth $180,000, with the potential for full implementation, worth over $2 million. I had 6 weeks to deliver a working system that would handle their most complex distribution challenges. 6 weeks to prove that the woman they'd tried to institutionalize was capable of managing projects that could make national business news. 6 weeks before everything would change forever. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning in June, while I was debugging the final module of the Fortune 500 retailer's pilot system. Jennifer answered the house phone, a rare occurrence since most calls came to their cell phones. Her voice carried through the garage wall, confused and slightly irritated. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong number. There's no business operating from this address." My blood turned to ice. I minimized my code editor and crept closer to the door, straining to hear the conversation. "Martinez Logistics Solutions?" Jennifer continued. "No, definitely not. The only Martinez here is my sister-in-law, and she's been having some difficulties adjusting after military service." I closed my eyes, knowing exactly what was happening. The TechCrunch article had published that morning, and journalists were doing follow-up research. Someone had traced my business registration to the address I'd used, Marcus's house, and was calling to verify details for their story. "She's unemployed, actually," Jennifer went on, her tone becoming more animated as she warmed to the subject. "Living in our garage while she tries to get back on her feet. Quite sad, really. Are you sure you have the right number?" The reporter was persistent. I could hear Jennifer's responses becoming more flustered as she tried to explain why a successful tech company would be associated with their address. Finally, she handed the phone to Marcus, who had emerged from his home office to see what the commotion was about. "This is Marcus Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the authority he used in business calls. "Yes, Sarah is my sister, but I think there's been some confusion. She's not running any business. She's been staying with us while dealing with some personal challenges." The silence stretched as the reporter apparently explained what they were calling about. I could practically hear Marcus's confusion through the wall. "TechCrunch?" he repeated. "Are you absolutely certain? Sarah Martinez, logistics software, operating from this address." Another pause. "Can you send me the link to this article?" I heard rapid typing on his phone, then absolute silence. The kind of silence that precedes earthquakes and explosions. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was completely different, smaller, uncertain, almost fearful. I need to call you back," he said, and hung up. The garage door opened 30 seconds later. Marcus stood there, phone in hand, staring at me like I was a stranger who had somehow replaced his sister overnight. Jennifer appeared behind him, her expression shifting from confusion to something approaching shock. "Sarah," Marcus said slowly, "I just read an article about you, about your business, about contracts worth millions of dollars." I looked up from my laptop, where the retailer's logistics system was still running its final test sequence. 27 months of data processing in real time, optimizing supply chain decisions for hundreds of locations simultaneously. The screen showed green check marks across every module, a perfect implementation that would save the company millions annually. "Which article?" I asked, though I already knew. Jennifer stepped forward, her phone displaying the TechCrunch feature. The headline read, "From Combat to Code, How This Veteran Built a $1 Million Logistics Empire from Scratch." Below it was a professional headshot I had taken the previous week, showing me in a business suit, looking confident and successful. Nothing like the defeated woman they saw shuffling to the bathroom every morning. "Is this real?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, are you actually running a multi-million-dollar software company?" The moment I'd been preparing for had arrived, but not in the controlled way I'd planned. I'd wanted to reveal my success after the Fortune 500 contract was complete, after I'd secured office space, after I'd established enough distance to make the conversation feel less like revenge and more like simple truth-telling. "Yes," I said simply. "From our garage?" Jennifer's voice cracked on the last word. "From your garage." Marcus sat down heavily on an overturned bucket, staring at the equipment surrounding my workspace. For the first time, he was seeing it clearly. The professional monitors, the server rack disguised as storage shelving, the backup power systems, the technical documentation covering every surface, the setup of someone running a serious business operation, not someone avoiding responsibility. "How long?" he asked. "Since about 3 months after I moved in here." Jennifer made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "The job interviews, the applications, the vocational rehabilitation program, all of it was—" "Some of it was real," I said. "I did apply for jobs initially, but I stopped when the business started working. Why would I take a $40,000 a year position when I was making more than that per month?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could see them processing the implications, understanding how completely they'd misread the situation. The woman they'd pitied, patronized, and planned to institutionalize had been quietly building something extraordinary while they slept 20 feet away. "The facility," Marcus said suddenly. "The veteran program Mom and Dad wanted you to consider. You were never going to go, were you?" "I was never going to need to go," I corrected. "I had already solved my problems. I was just waiting for the right time to tell you." Jennifer's phone buzzed with another call. She glanced at the screen and paled. "It's Channel 7 News. They want to interview the family of Sarah Martinez, the successful veteran entrepreneur." The irony was exquisite. The same people who had questioned my stability, my work ethic, my ability to contribute to society, were now being contacted by news outlets wanting to celebrate my success. The narrative they'd constructed about my failure was colliding with objective reality in the most public way possible. "We need to talk about this properly," Marcus said, standing up and pacing the small space. "Sarah, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling when you were actually successful?" I finished. "Because you never asked what I was working on. You assumed I was failing and treated me accordingly. You made it clear that my presence here was temporary charity, not family support." Jennifer's phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed the local newspaper's number. She declined the call, but we all knew it wouldn't stop there. The story was picking up momentum, and the media wanted the human interest angle. The family background, the struggle narrative, the triumph over adversity. "They're going to want to interview all of us," Jennifer said, her marketing background kicking in despite her shock. "This is going to be a big story. Veteran homeless woman becomes millionaire tech entrepreneur. The garage angle makes it even more compelling. I was never homeless, I said quietly. I was family. At least I thought I was. Marcus winced. Sarah, we were trying to help. We thought you needed structure, support, professional guidance. I needed you to believe in me, I replied. Instead, you believed I was broken and tried to fix me. But I wasn't broken. I was just building something you couldn't see. The garage suddenly felt too small for all of us, and the weight of 20 months of misunderstanding. Outside, I could hear a van pulling into the driveway. Through the small window, I saw the Channel 7 News logo on its side. They're here, Jennifer whispered. I looked at my laptop screen, where the Fortune 500 system was completing its final validation. 16 months of work, hidden from the people who were supposed to know me best, was about to become public knowledge whether I was ready or not. The woman they'd tried to manage was about to become the woman managing their response to national media attention. The tables had turned so completely that none of us were prepared for what came next. The garage door was still open, and I could hear the news crew setting up equipment outside. In a few minutes, they would want to interview the family of the successful entrepreneur, to hear about our supportive relationship and shared pride in overcoming adversity. But first, we had to figure out what our relationship actually was, now. That the truth was, the test came within hours of the news crew's departure. The Channel 7 interview had gone surprisingly well, with Marcus and Jennifer managing to present a united family front despite their obvious shock. They'd spoken about being proud of Sarah's determination and amazed by her incredible work ethic, carefully avoiding any mention of garage sleeping arrangements or intervention attempts. But the real test arrived that evening in the form of a phone call from my parents. Mom's voice was strained when Marcus handed me his phone, the weight of their earlier assumptions hanging heavy in the conversation. Sarah, honey, we saw the news story, she began, her tone uncertain in a way I'd never heard before. We had no idea you were doing so well. I wasn't doing well when you visited in October, I replied, settling onto my air mattress with the phone pressed to my ear. I was building something. There's a difference. Dad's voice joined the conversation as Mom switched to speakerphone. We're proud of you, sweetheart. Really proud. And we're sorry if we didn't understand what you were going through. The apology felt hollow, delivered only after external validation had forced them to reconsider their judgment. They weren't sorry for treating me like a failure. They were sorry for being wrong about my success. The distinction mattered more than they realized. We want to help, Mom continued. Your father and I have been talking, and we think we could invest in your business, help you expand, maybe 20 or 30,000 to get you started properly. I almost laughed. $20,000 wouldn't cover a month of expenses for the operation I was already running. The Fortune 500 contract alone was worth more than their annual household income. But their offer revealed how completely they still misunderstood the scale of what I'd built. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully. But the business is already well-funded. I'm not looking for investors right now. The silence on the other end was telling. They'd called expecting to rescue me financially, to finally provide the support they'd withheld when I actually needed it. Learning that their help was unnecessary left them without a script for the conversation. Well, Dad said eventually, maybe we could help in other ways. Your mother could do bookkeeping, or I could handle some of the administrative work. We want to be involved. Now that success was visible and validated by external sources, they wanted to be part of the story they'd tried to edit me out of. The timing was too convenient, the motivation too transparent. I have administrative systems in place, I said. But thank you for thinking of me. The real test came the next morning, when Jennifer knocked on the garage door with a cup of coffee and an expression I'd never seen before, something approaching respect mixed with calculation. I brought you this, she said, offering the coffee in a mug I'd never been allowed to use before. I thought we should talk. I accepted the coffee but remained seated on my air mattress, maintaining the physical dynamic that had defined our Relationship for 20 months. She looked around the garage with new eyes, seeing the professional equipment and organized workspace as evidence of capability rather than delusion. "I owe you an apology," she began, though her tone suggested the words were carefully rehearsed. "I didn't understand what you were doing here. I thought you were struggling." "I was struggling," I replied. "Just not in the way you assumed." She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warm morning. "Marcus and I have been talking. We want you to know that you're welcome to stay as long as you need. The guest room is available again if you'd prefer to move back inside." The offer was generous on its surface, but I could see the calculation behind it. Having a successful tech entrepreneur as a house guest was much more appealing than supporting an unemployed veteran. The change in their attitude was based entirely on external validation, not genuine understanding of who I was or what I'd been through. "That's kind of you," I said, "but I'm actually looking at office space downtown. I need to expand operations, and the garage has served its purpose." Jennifer's expression shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of something that looked like disappointment. Not disappointment in my decision, but disappointment that the opportunity to associate with my success was slipping away. "Of course," she said quickly. "That makes sense, but you'll still be around, right? For family dinners, holidays, that sort of thing?" Family dinners. For 20 months, I'd been excluded from their regular meals, relegated to eating alone in the garage while they shared family time in the warmth of their dining room. Now that my success was public knowledge, I was suddenly welcome at their table again. "I'll be busy with the business," I said, "but I'm sure we'll see each other." The most telling test came later that day, when Marcus arrived home from work, with a bottle of champagne and a speech about celebrating my success. He'd apparently spent the day fielding calls from co-workers and neighbors who had seen the news coverage, basking in reflected glory as the brother of a successful entrepreneur. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," he said, popping the cork in the garage where I was finishing the Fortune 500 implementation. "I always knew you had it in you." He hadn't always known. 3 months earlier, he'd been ready to commit me to a residential treatment facility for veterans who couldn't adapt to civilian life. 6 months before that, he'd questioned my work ethic and suggested I was being too picky about employment opportunities. The revision of history was swift and complete. "Thank you," I said, accepting a plastic cup of champagne while continuing to work on my laptop. That means a lot, but it didn't mean what he thought it meant. His pride was contingent on external validation, his support conditional on visible success. I'd learned something important about the nature of family loyalty during my time in the garage. It was often less about unconditional love and more about social perception. The twins, Marcus Jr. and David, provided the most honest reaction. They were genuinely excited about having a famous aunt, and peppered me with questions about computers and business. Their enthusiasm was uncomplicated by adult concerns about social standing or financial advantage. "Can you teach us to code?" David asked during dinner, the first family meal I'd been invited to in months. "Will you buy us video games with your $1 million?" Marcus Jr. added, with the refreshing directness of childhood. I laughed, the first genuine laughter I'd experienced in that house since arriving. "I can teach you some basic programming, and we'll see about the video games." Their acceptance was immediate and complete, based not on my success, but on my willingness to engage with them as an adult who took their interests seriously. They didn't care about the money or the news coverage. They were just happy to have an aunt who wasn't treated like a problem to be solved. The evening ended with Marcus and Jennifer outlining plans for how we could leverage the media attention to build the business further. They spoke about family branding opportunities, about positioning themselves as the support system behind my success, about maximizing the PR value of the veteran entrepreneur story. I listened politely while finishing my champagne, understanding that their test of my character had revealed more about them than about me. They'd shown me exactly what their love was worth. Nothing when I needed it. Everything when I no longer required it. The woman they'd tried to manage was now managing their expectations about her future availability. The sister they'd tried to fix was deciding whether they were worth keeping in her life as she moved forward. The burden they'd reluctantly carried was choosing what weight she was willing to bear on their behalf. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done pretending that their validation mattered more than my own self-respect. The new equilibrium began to establish itself 3 weeks after the TechCrunch article changed everything. I signed the lease on a downtown office space, $400, square feet on the 4th floor of a converted warehouse, with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light. The monthly rent was more than most people's salaries, but I paid 6 months in advance without blinking. Moving day was symbolic in ways I hadn't anticipated. I packed my belongings into boxes, real boxes this time, not trash bags, and loaded them into a rental truck. 20 months of living in a garage reduced to 4 boxes of personal items and several $1,000s worth of business equipment. The air mattress went into the dumpster. I wouldn't be needing it again. Marcus and Jennifer stood in the driveway, watching the loading process with expressions I couldn't quite read. They'd offered to help, but I'd declined politely. This transition needed to be mine alone, a clean break from the space where I'd been simultaneously invisible and constantly observed. "You'll keep in touch, right?" Jennifer asked as I secured the last box in the truck bed. Her voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before the news coverage. "Of course," I replied, though we both knew the dynamic had shifted permanently. I would keep in touch the way successful people keep in touch with family: holiday cards, occasional phone calls, carefully orchestrated visits that felt more like social obligations than genuine connection. The boys were different. They hugged me fiercely, making me promise to show them the new office and teach them more about computers. Their affection was uncomplicated by adult concerns about social positioning or financial advantage. I would keep those promises because they mattered in ways their parents' approval never had. The office transformation took 2 weeks. I hired contractors to build proper workstations, installed enterprise-grade network infrastructure, and created a conference room where I could meet with clients professionally. The space that had once been a storage facility became the headquarters of Martinez Logistics Solutions, complete with a reception area and dedicated server room. I hired my first employee, a recent computer science graduate named David Chen, who had responded to my job posting with code samples that impressed me. He was brilliant, eager, and completely uninterested in my personal history. To him, I was simply the founder of a successful tech company, not a veteran who had overcome adversity. The professional relationship was refreshing in its straightforward nature. My parents visited the office on a Thursday afternoon, ostensibly to see where I worked, but obviously to gauge the magnitude of my success. They walked through the space with careful expressions, taking in the modern furniture, the multiple monitors, the whiteboard covered with technical diagrams that represented millions of dollars in potential contracts. "This is impressive, honey," Mom said, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "Really impressive." Dad examined the server room through its glass wall, shaking his head slowly. "All this from software? From that logistics program you were working on?" "Logistics programs," I corrected. "Multiple systems for different industries. The technology scales across various applications." They nodded as if they understood, but I could see they were still processing the gap between their assumptions and reality. The daughter they'd wanted to institutionalize was explaining technical concepts they couldn't grasp, managing a business they couldn't comprehend, living a life they hadn't imagined possible. "We're proud of you," Dad said finally. We should have understood sooner." Their pride felt hollow because it was contingent on external validation. They weren't proud of my resilience when I was sleeping in a garage. They weren't proud of my work ethic when I was coding until dawn. They were proud now because my success was visible and socially acceptable, because they could brag to their friends about their daughter, the tech entrepreneur. But I accepted their pride graciously because arguing about its authenticity would accomplish nothing. Some relationships exist in the space between what is and what should be, maintained through mutual agreement to overlook fundamental incompatibilities. The Fortune 500 contract completion party was held in my new conference room on a Friday evening, in August. The client's executives flew in from their headquarters, bringing champagne and congratulations for a project that had exceeded every expectation. The system I'd built was saving them over $2 million annually in logistics costs, while improving delivery times by 38%. Marcus and Jennifer attended the celebration, invited as family members but clearly out of their depth among the business executives and technical professionals. They smiled politely and made small talk about my incredible journey, while I discussed implementation strategies and future development phases with people who understood the complexities of enterprise software. Watching them navigate that environment taught me something important about the nature of our relationship. They wanted to be proud of me, wanted to claim association with my success, but they didn't actually understand what I did or why it mattered. Their pride was based on external recognition rather than genuine comprehension of my work. The most significant change was in how I viewed myself. For 20 months, I'd defined my worth in opposition to their judgment, working to prove them wrong rather than simply pursuing my own goals. The success had been as much about validation as achievement, about showing them who I really was beneath their assumptions, but success had brought clarity about what really mattered. The opinion of people who couldn't see my potential when I needed support wasn't worth the energy I'd expended seeking their approval. The family members who had questioned my stability weren't qualified to judge my achievements. The validation I'd craved was less important than the satisfaction of building something meaningful. I established new boundaries that reflected this understanding. Family dinners became monthly rather than weekly events. Phone calls were scheduled rather than spontaneous. I shared general updates about the business without providing detailed explanations they wouldn't understand anyway. The boundaries weren't punitive, they were protective. I was preserving my energy for relationships that added value rather than requiring constant emotional labor. I was choosing to engage with people who supported my goals rather than those who had needed external proof of my worth before believing in me. Marcus struggled with the new dynamic more than Jennifer did. He'd always seen himself as the protective older brother, even though he was younger, and my independence challenged that self-image. He wanted to be involved in my success, to play a role in decisions that no longer required his input. "You don't have to do everything alone," he said during one of our monthly dinners. "Family is supposed to help each other." "Family did help," I replied. "You gave me a place to stay when I needed it. But that chapter is finished now." He nodded, but I could see he wanted something more: ongoing involvement, continued relevance, a role in the story that had moved beyond his participation. The brother who had reluctantly provided temporary housing wanted to become a permanent part of the business narrative. The new equilibrium was working because it was based on reality rather than obligation. I maintained relationships with family members who genuinely supported my goals while creating distance from those who had needed proof of my success before, offering encouragement. I was no longer trying to earn love that should have been freely given, no longer seeking approval from people whose judgment had proven unreliable. The woman who had slept in a garage was now sleeping in her own home, in a bed she'd chosen, in a space that reflected her achievements rather than her circumstances. The business that had been hidden from family members was now employing other people, serving clients across multiple industries, generating wealth that provided security and independence. But the most important change was internal. I had stopped measuring my worth by other people's recognition and started evaluating my life by my own standards. The success was meaningful, not because it impressed my family, but because it represented the fulfillment of goals I'd set for myself despite their doubts. The equilibrium was stable because it was sustainable. I no longer needed them to understand my choices, and they no longer needed to approve of my decisions. We could maintain family relationships based on mutual respect rather than emotional dependence, on chosen connection rather than obligatory engagement. That balance would define all my relationships going forward. The journal entry I wrote that night was the shortest I'd penned in years. I built something they said was impossible. Now I get to choose who deserves a place in what comes next. 6 months later, Martinez Logistics Solutions employed 12 people and served Fortune 500 companies across North America. The garage where I'd once slept was now Marcus's workout room again, but sometimes I'd drive by the house and remember the woman who had coded her way out of despair on a deflating air mattress. My parents still bragged about their successful daughter at neighborhood barbecues. Marcus still told coworkers about his entrepreneur sister. Jennifer still sent holiday cards signed the Martinez family. But their pride no longer mattered to me the way it once had. What mattered was the scholarship fund I'd established for veterans transitioning to civilian careers. What mattered was the young woman I'd hired straight out of community college, giving her the opportunity no one had given me. What mattered was the company culture I was building, one where worth wasn't contingent on external validation. The TechCrunch article had been updated twice to reflect the company's growth. The headline now read, "How this veteran built a $10 million logistics empire from her brother's garage." But the real story wasn't about the money or the recognition. It was about learning that the people who doubt you when you're down aren't qualified to celebrate you when you're up. It was about understanding that success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. The girl they'd tried to fix had become the woman who no longer needed fixing. And that made all the difference. If this story inspired you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment below sharing your own comeback story. I read every single one. Remember, they only see your current chapter, but you're writing the entire book. Keep grinding, keep building, and keep proving yourself right. New inspirational stories drop every Tuesday and Friday.